Hey, Shalom, Call Halal, Yahweh Bashim, Yahweh Shai, Bashim, Chavodash, Devons and Apostles of Great Millstone, and Shalom, true brothers in the highways and byways, doing the work sincerely and faithfully, and continually fighting the good fight of faith. Lord willing, we'll find that number to be delivered. All right. This lesson is going to be a little different. I'm going to play a video from a guy by the name of Scotty Kilmer. Now, Scotty Kilmer is a very well-known, YouTube mechanic who's pretty good, man. And I suggest you brothers who have cars and your cars always got some issues, subscribe to this man's channel, man. He can give you some great insight and some great pointers on what the deal is with your car. And save brothers some money that way as well. But without further ado on that, he's gonna break it down, man. He's gonna break it down from the automotive industry's perspective of what's happening between the United States of America, Ukraine, Russia. And he gives his insight, like I said, from the automotive's perspective, which is pretty interesting. Because even so, years ago when they had that cash for clunkers, a lot of you people had sold your cars or traded your cars in for short money. All right, and these devils knew exactly what they were doing. Even when you people at least understood, what your car was truly worth. All right. Catalytic converters, for example, they contain platinum, gold, uridium, all types of precious metals. All right, and those things right there alone will get you $500 to $600. Some people was giving the whole damn car away for that much. All right, so when that cash for clunkers had taken place, these devils made a killing, man. They made an absolute killing. But now, if you look at what's happening right now in the shortage of everything, these very same so-called clunkers, they're doubled in price right now. All right, a car that was going for $1,000, maybe $1,200 is now damn near going for like $3,000. All right, why? Because of the precious metals, because of the microchips that are in it, and the computer systems that are in it. So these devils knew exactly what they were doing. All right, so without further ado, let me play this video from Scotty Kilmer. Like I said, he kind of breaks it down from the automotive perspective, which is very interesting. And I believe it's insightful for brothers as well. All right, so here it goes.
History shows that the relationship between Russia and the U.S. has a huge impact to consumer prices. Just look back to March 2014. After Russia annexed Crimea, the U.S. imposed sanctions. But what happened was Ford's stock price went down. And this year, Russia started a war with Ukraine. And it's already impacting the U.S. auto industry. Russia is a major producer of critical metals for car production, like nickel and palladium. Russia supplies nearly 50% of the palladium used to make catalytic converters. And most of the lithium-ion batteries in our cars come from Russia, too. If Putin does decide to withhold Russia's metal supplies completely, U.S. car makers might not be able to produce internal combustion engine cars at all. The current Russian-Ukrainian crisis is also making prices of these metals skyrocketing globally. The cost of palladium per ounce has increased by 50% in just a few months. Imagine what's coming next. But there's something worse than the car shortage that's coming up. The conflict in Eastern Europe is putting a strain on the global food supply. A couple of months ago, President Biden warned Americans about an impending food shortage to come in the next several months. These food shortages won't only impact grocery stores, but they'll have a major impact on the auto industry too. Here's why. To understand how these global food shortages even came about, we have to travel back in time about 2 years ago, all the way back to March 2020. That's when the pandemic started spreading around the globe. Entire countries were going under lockdowns. Those lockdowns forced schools and restaurants to shut their doors for months. This completely blindsided the farming industry because the demand for their food products dried up, and so they had to destroy all the extra supply they had. For example, that included dumping tons of gallons of milk, plowing through entire crops, and even euthanizing their own livestock. But it wasn't only the farming industry that was suffering. With restaurants and businesses closing their doors for uncertain time, people lost their jobs, unemployment skyrocketed, and in the meantime, government printed money to send out stimulus checks. The problem was that this led to shortages at food banks, really. The lockdowns in 2020 were just the first drop in the food shortage that will only get worse. In the months leading to 2021, grocery stores worldwide were already finding their shelves empty. But it's not over yet. Analysts expect these food shortages to only increase in magnitude. But now, it's not directly because of the pandemic. Now it's due to the conflict in Eastern Europe. And the effects of these food shortages are going to reach a lot closer to home than you might think. This past March, Biden spoke to reporters at NATO headquarters and warned Americans that a food shortage is impending. Because of the sanctions against Russia, Russia is retaliating big time. They've reduced exports of their natural gas, crude oil, grain, and rare earth metals. They've also reduced export of fuel for nuclear power plants in the U.S. And they're blocking shipping of wheat from Ukraine to the entire world. Here's what we do agree on now. They are anticipating that higher energy, fertilizer, corn, and wheat prices could impact the price of growing and purchasing critical fuel and food supplies here in America and around the world. Here's the thing. Ukraine and Russia are both major exporters of fertilizer. But it's not just the U.S. government who's talking about an impending food crisis. Farmers and truckers across the country have been sounding the alarm.
It's up 66% this year, wheat up 22.7%.
For example, one man tweeted that farmers in the South can't get fertilizer for their crops and that farmers in the Midwest can't get nitrogen or fertilizers. He said, buckle up, folks, because the media isn't even warning you. Talking about sounding an alarm. Another farmer spoke out saying that he and other farmers across the country believe that dramatically increased costs for fertilizer will make it impossible for farmers to profitably plant corn this year. Operating costs for things like fertilizer, seeds, and liquid nitrogen are almost triple and quadruple the old prices. It will not be profitable to plant this year. Some farmers are deciding to switch from corn to soybeans for 2022. But there's currently a shortage of soybean seeds, so plans are still up in the air. Some farmers even gone so far as agreeing that will be a major grain shortage later this year, especially with corn. And that's a major issue, seeing that corn is one of the fundamental pillars of the U.S. food industry. Just remember one key thing. Shortages of corn and wheat isn't like some shortage of semiconductor chips or even cars. If you miss the farming season, this impacts food supplies for the next few years. And while we can deal without a new smartphone or new car, we can't live without food. The longer the war continues, the higher the risk of ripple effects of these food supplies. It's even expected to extend to the auto industry as a whole. According to many experts, the war could reduce global production of new cars and trucks by the millions in 2022. That's this year. The European auto market will feel the effects too, and they'll feel it first. Then the U.S. and other markets will be next. European automakers Mercedes-Benz and Audi have already announced that they'll be cutting production at their plants. This is due to the wire harness that are no longer coming in from their plants in Ukraine. Russia and Ukraine are extremely important sources of palladium and neon gas, which is critical to producing semiconductor chips. Ukraine itself produces almost 70% of the world's neon gas needed for important components, especially in the auto industry. But because of the current crisis in both these countries, researchers expect there will be 3.5 million fewer vehicles globally. But now let's talk about short term. How bad are we talking here? For consumers here in the U.S., the most immediate impact of this war is higher gas prices. They're already sky high, and they're only expected to continue skyrocket. Because of these sky high prices, Europeans have already decreased their driving habits, like those in Turkey and Germany. Did you know that if you think $4 to $5 a gallon in the U.S. is expensive? Well, listen to how expensive gas is in Germany. $8.26 a gallon. No wonder drivers in Europe are getting smarter about how much they really need to drive. Experts predict that a price tag of $4 a gallon in the U.S. by the 1st of April. And indeed, last month, gas prices passed that mark in every U.S. state for the first time in history. And since their original predictions have come true, what are they expecting now? Well, the head of petroleum analysis at Gas Buddy said today, liquid fuels have turned into liquid gold. Prices for gasoline and diesel are spiraling out of control because of the global supply and demand imbalance. Canada also hit an all-time gas price high the same week. Their gas hit $8.15 Canadian dollars a gallon for the first time in history. And that's despite the fact that Canada has the world's third largest oil reserves after Venezuela and Saudi Arabia. So, what are gas price predictions for the future? Gas Buddy predicts the average cost for a gallon in this country will hit $4.25 in June. For now, American and Canadians can still drive without overly worrying about gas prices, but eventually, we too will reach a tipping point. Did you know that last month, Renault agreed to sell their stake to Russia? Here's why this is important to know. Renault originally began their joint venture with the city of Moscow back in 2005. Yeah, last March. They suspended operations at their Moscow plant. This announcement was made only hours after Ukrainian President Zelensky addressed the French Senate and asked for Renault and other French companies to leave Russia. Then Renault announced their plans to sell their 68% share in Avtovaz, Russia's biggest car maker, to NAMI, a Moscow-based automotive research institute. Renault did not disclose the exact price they planned to sell the stake for. but I'm sure it's nominal because if they don't sell it, Russia will just seize it for free anyway. Renault called the sale to the city of Moscow a responsible choice. Chief executive Luca De Maio said that it was a difficult but necessary decision. Russian officials recently threatened to nationalize Western businesses backing out of Russia due to the current war. So, by nationalizing the Renault factory, that would make it the first major transfer of private assets into Russia's hands. Recently, they nationalized McDonald's. This is just the beginning. Think of it from an economic standpoint. If Renault, with 45,000 employees in Russia, is now nationalized, and they just lost an entire factory and business in the country, won't they increase their car prices to recuperate some of this loss? Won't this also create a shortage of Renault cars? So now you see how the war is impacting the car supply and prices. To understand this a bit more, just look what happened in Iran when the U.S. sanctioned it. Some of you have described these international sanctions as crippling Iran's car industry. You see, at the time of these sanctions, automobile manufacturing was Iran's second largest industry. It accounted for 10% of Iran's GDP and 4% of its workforce. The only thing larger than the auto industry in Iran was the hydrocarbon industry. Some in Iran were expecting the sanctions for quite some time, so they got prepared for it. Iranian firms were able to work with companies in Eastern Europe and the Persian Gulf to overcome some of the challenges of these sanctions. After these sanctions hit, from 2011 to 2013, Iran's productions of cars dropped to more than half, from 1,420,000 a year to 624,750 a year. And at the same time, imported cars totaled 3.7 billion in 2013. That made up almost 12.6% of domestic production. But then came the late part of 2013. Nuclear negotiations moved into a new phase and sanctions were partially eased. And so in 2014, this downward trend was reversed. Production increased by a huge 53%. That's 736,948 total vehicles in 2013, up to 1,130,164 in 2014. And the Iranian auto industry as a whole grew 41% in April of the same year compared to the one prior. These sanctions also led to the sharp devaluation of the Iranian currency, a devaluation of more than 200% since the sanctions were reinforced. Because of this, the price of imported cars skyrocketed. And so many Iranian consumers turned to domestic cars. To produce a car in Iran cost about $2,500. The average imported car cost around $8,000. So you can understand the pull towards domestic cars and away from imports. In 2014, Iran produced 1.1 million vehicles, and you'll never guess how much of that ended up saving them. Almost $6 billion. Interestingly enough, during that same period, Iran decided to expand trade relations with Eastern Europe and China. Chery, a major Chinese auto manufacturer, had begun exporting cars to Iran in 2005. But after these international sanctions, more than 20 Chinese automakers and manufacturers entered Iran's market. That included companies like Shangwan, Leafman, Haima, Dongfeng, Futon, Brilliance, and MG. Have you even heard of these car makers? Obviously, most Americans haven't. Those are cheap cars, but they take you where you need to go. Anyway, after all that, in 2018, the U.S. reinstated sanctions on Iran. Total value of imported contents for car manufacturing was cut by $2.5 billion. So, did that end up destroying Iran's auto industry completely? Far from it, believe it or not. Iran's auto sector has started standing on its own feet, even though they had previously been relying on imported car kits for years. Once these foreign companies stopped supplying to Iran, Iran shocked the auto industry as we know it. In fact, Iranian officials have now started referring to these sanctions as a blessing. That's because these sanctions motivated Iran to build and rely on their own cars. Right now, each Iranian-made car requires $1,500 to $1,700 US to make. You recall it was $2,500 in 2013. But Iran expects that figure to decrease exponentially, thanks to government support. In fact, an Iranian deputy industry minister recently stated that Iranian automakers would produce more than 1.3 million cars in 2021. That's a whole 50% jump in production, despite all the U.S. sanctions. And I predict a similar thing will happen to the Russian car industry. No, they won't drive BMW or Cadillacs because of sanctions, but now they'll start making Ladas for $1,500 or whatever, and they'll still drive them wherever they need to go. So really then, who's losing out as a result of sanctions? All foreign car makers who stop exporting to Russia at the end of the day are losing out in that market. As global food shortages gets worse, and believe me it will, then consumers will deprioritize new car purchases completely. But for now, please share this video with family and friends, and save this video on your watch later list and check it out again next year when I can say, I told you so.
Alright, so that's my man Scotty Kilmer. Like I said, a pretty good mechanic, very, very knowledgeable in automotive information. And this video, I believe, was very very insightful, to those who don't understand how the automotive, world, so to say, plays into all this. All right. So that being said, I'm gonna get a couple of scriptures. Ecclesiastes 1:9 says, "The thing that has been is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun." And right, when he was going into his video, he was talking about all these things that happened in 2013, 2012, 14, all these things are just reoccurring once again. All right. But now that we're at the end of this thing, this is going to be the end all be all. All right. There's going to be no bouncing back for America, man. There's no bouncing back. This isn't going to be just a rut, a rut in the path, so to say. This is it. All right. This is it. We on the home stretch, man. We as the hopeful elect, we on the home stretch. And may Yahweh Shai continue to, keep us and watch us and give us the spirit and the strength to continue his will on this earth. All right. Jeremiah 51:9. We would have healed Babylon, but she is not healed. Forsake her. Let us go, every one into his own country. For judgment has reached unto heaven and is lifted up even to the skies. All right. And you're going to start seeing that. You're going to start seeing these people starting to flee out of Babylon, flee out of America to go back to their own locations. And a couple years ago, Vladimir Putin had made that big announcement to all those Russians who are abroad, come back home where you can be protected. All right. And this is just the way it's going, man. So everybody's going to start fleeing to their own country before Esau starts sewing up this whole, flying and crossing over borders. They're about to shut all this shit down, man. All right. So there's no hell in this place. It doesn't matter what these congressmen and what these, presidents and sanctions and this, that, and the third. None of this shit matters. It's all coming to an end, and rightfully so. All right. So Lord willing, you brothers are edified with this one. You got a little insight on how the automotive plays a role in this whole, demise of Babylon, America, and the war on Ukraine and in Russia and all the other nations. All right. So with that, Lord, when I'll see you on another show, I say shalom.